My name is Ken Hekman. Welcome to this course entitled 4 Essential Disciplines, a training guide for healthcare leaders worldwide. My colleague, Quinton Friesen, and I are leading you through 15 modules to help you improve your knowledge, skills, and attitudes as a healthcare leader. This is Module 12 of 15. Welcome back. In this module, we will conclude our examination of the discipline of sustainability by focusing on pricing strategies and auditing principles. Let's take a look at our learning objectives. Participants will understand the relationship between prices, costs, and value to consumers for healthcare services. Recognize when and how to apply discounting strategies in healthcare organizations. Examine techniques for tracking cash flow and financial decisions made inside the organization. Understand when external audits are valuable and how to select an appropriate external auditor. Appreciate leadership integrity and transparency and how they impact long-term organizational sustainability.
Let's begin by looking at the relationship between prices, costs, and value, beginning with understanding what we mean by the term value. Every service has a value, even if the service is offered out of a spirit of generous compassion and selflessness. A sustainable organization must determine a fair price for its services and find a way to provide those services below that price. Even organizations fully dependent on grants and donations must determine the value of their services in the eyes of their donors. Pricing is both an art and an economic science.
Let's look at some examples of how people define value in healthcare. A pregnant woman has experienced 2 miscarriages without prenatal care. She has recently learned that good prenatal care can prevent a miscarriage and increase the chances for delivering a healthy baby. Now, she is pregnant again. Do you think she is likely to place a higher value on prenatal care for her 3rd pregnancy? An adult daughter needs to take time away from her job to provide full-time care for her mother, who is disabled because of a deteriorating hip. If the daughter loses income when she is not working, do you think she will find value in paying for her mother's surgery, allowing the daughter to return to work?
There are 2 basic pricing strategies that healthcare leaders should examine. A cost-plus strategy begins by figuring out what products and services cost to produce, then adding a markup for future growth. This strategy requires managers to fully understand all components of the cost for each product and each service. A market-driven pricing strategy is based on understanding the economic benefits of services received, such as in the 2 examples we looked at previously. It requires managers to understand how services actually impact patients and their families.
To learn more about the cost-plus pricing strategy, let's examine the financial planning model. Financial planning requires managers to anticipate the income needs for all the components of cost. We begin at the base of the pyramid with direct costs, such as supplies and wages of direct care staff. Then we examine indirect costs, such as mortgage payments to pay for facilities, equipment costs, utilities, wages of support staff, and wages for administration. The 3rd component is working capital. The organization must maintain enough cash to cover at least 30 days of normal expenses. As the organization grows, working capital must also grow. Managers must also plan for capital improvements. They must build reserves to pay for new equipment and to replace existing equipment and facilities as they wear out over time. The final component is called profit, or excess revenues. It is essential for future working capital to meet new business development requirements and new community needs.
A common mistake managers make is to count only the direct and indirect costs required to provide services. They ignore the needs for increasing working capital, capital improvements, and profits. These three categories require cash that must come from operational revenues, just as surely as direct and indirect costs require cash. The organization cannot continue to sustain itself and grow if it does not provide for replacement equipment and facilities and a reserve to pay for the startup costs of new services. For example, if a hospital collected enough to cover the costs of paying its staff and keeping enough supplies on hand, but allowed its facilities and equipment to deteriorate, it would soon become less attractive to patients, and equipment malfunctions would compromise clinical care. If a hospital recognizes opportunities to expand its obstetric service, but does not have sufficient cash to finance the expansion, it would miss the potential for positive cash flows from new services.
The term profit may be confusing, especially for nonprofit or governmental organizations. Faith-based and humanitarian organizations typically approach the management of healthcare services as though revenues should only be sufficient to cover direct and indirect costs. If revenues are achieved greater than expenses in these organizations, managers may feel a sense of guilt or obligation to reduce fees to restore the organization to its humanitarian balance. I would argue, however, managers who ignore the needs for profits or excess revenues limit the organization's ability to sustain itself and therefore compromise its basic humanitarian purposes.
Some nonprofit organizations may rely on donors for capital campaigns, for new facilities, or new equipment. Donors are often attracted to highly visible and tangible capital campaigns more than they are interested in providing ongoing operational support. They like to point to a building or major item of equipment purchased with their donations. This approach may be honorable for donors, but it places leaders of healthcare organizations in a predicament. If revenue-producing equipment breaks down and a reserve has not been built up to pay for its replacement, the leader is forced to go back to donors to request a new donation to buy new equipment once again. It highlights an unhealthy dependency and limits the sustainability of the organization. If a healthcare organization is losing money, what are the options available to its leaders and managers? There are really only 4 options. Reduce the costs, increase the fees or seek other revenue sources, increase the volume of services to levels that will cover all costs, or stop providing the service.
When healthcare leaders and managers fully understand the components of the costs of services and try to set pricing strategies that the community can afford, they may find they have to apply 2 strategies at the same time. They may need to work hard to reduce the cost of care while at the same time use discounting strategies for those patients who are most vulnerable economically.
I have often heard healthcare leaders complain that their communities simply cannot afford even basic healthcare services, implying that charity is the only solution. But when we dig further, we discover that communities often have people with a wide range of incomes, and that not everyone is equally vulnerable. In those circumstances, a sliding scale can be introduced to give everyone access to essential health services at prices they can afford. To implement a sliding scale, managers first need to identify the break-even costs for the service. Then they can estimate income levels of various segments of the community. Prices can be set to recover the discounts offered to lower-income patients while keeping full prices in force for those who can afford to pay.
Now let's turn our attention to auditing, which is a method of tracking financial decisions to maintain honesty and accountability. Sound auditing discipline protects the public interest and helps to sustain the healthcare services. It also improves financial decisions within the organization by assuring that leaders and managers are relying on credible financial information in their decision-making processes.
Why are audits necessary? First of all, they are necessary to protect resources for healthcare organizations such as governments, donors, insurance companies, and patients who pay directly for their care deserve to expect that healthcare leaders will use revenues responsibly to provide valuable healthcare services at reasonable costs. Audits are also necessary because financial issues are symbolic of other human qualities, and sometimes they draw out the worst of those human qualities. Money is a symbol of power, and the abuse of power and corruption are global challenges. News stories appear almost daily around the globe about corruption that disrupts the flow of goods and services and disrespects those who depend on those services. Audits represent a method of holding people accountable for the greater good of all. Finally, audits help to make sure that decisions can be made with accurate information rather than financial data that is distorted by intentional or unintentional errors.
We will take a brief look at two kinds of auditing functions: internal safeguards and external audits. Basic internal safeguards include the following. Every organization must have some sort of record-keeping system to record sales of goods and services. Every sale should be recorded consistently and transparently so managers can assure that all revenues are accounted for. Second, managers should segregate responsibilities for those who handle money. For example, the person who receives and records revenue should not be the same one who deposits the money in the bank. Segregation of responsibilities reduces the risk of collusion or collaborating for dishonest purposes. Third, bank statements should be reconciled every month with internal financial records. Fourth, healthcare managers should establish systems to control and monitor inventory of all supplies in the hospital, clinic, or healthcare organization to reduce the risk of stealing supplies. More advanced internal safeguards may include a periodic in-depth audit of each department, specialized audits to make sure that all charges are being captured and recorded, and an audit of payroll systems.
External audits have become an integral part of maintaining honesty and integrity in mature economic markets. Governing bodies of healthcare organizations and government agencies often require audits as ways to validate the proper use of grants, gifts, or loans. Trained auditors who comply with requirements of the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board usually conduct external audits. For more information about global efforts to maintain accountability, visit Transparency International online. Let's examine some common questions about pricing and auditing. Everyone in our community is poor. How can we become sustainable?
Widespread poverty can certainly limit the quantity and quality of healthcare services. But I have been consistently impressed as I have traveled the world to see how physicians and healthcare leaders have risen to the challenge of matching needs and resources even in the poorest communities. Every community has a range of people with various economic capabilities. The goal of healthcare leaders is to find ways to make healthcare services accessible to everyone in the community, regardless of economic capability.
We trust each other, so why do we need auditing?
Trust is a valuable human quality, and it is essential for leaders to earn and maintain the trust of employees, board members, government officials, and the community at large. Healthcare leaders who recognize the importance of trust also recognize that trust needs to be verified to be credible. Internal controls and external audits provide the important verification to keep trust at its highest level. This concludes our study of sustainability as an essential discipline for healthcare leaders and managers. We observed that sustainability begins with a sense of ownership and personal responsibility for building and maintaining healthcare service delivery systems. Sustainability grows by tracking financial results, by pricing services to meet the market conditions, and by auditing processes to keep the organization honest and accurate. The processes to assure sustainability are essential, but they work best when leaders and managers demonstrate integrity and transparency at the core of their character. From a very young age, parents teach their children that honesty is the best policy. The old saying is just as true for healthcare leaders in every country and every culture as it is for every child. Consider this exercise with your team. Design a sliding scale fee structure for a clinic to increase access to care in a poor community near you. This concludes Module 12 of 15. Thank you for watching.